Hi, Mike Kennedy with you, and I thought we would talk a little bit about food banks. I had a question on one of the posts, and a little history of food banks. It used to be, if you're my age, you could remember at one time your parents or you going to get what they called surplus food. The government would buy up certain foods, have them packaged, and then distribute them. One of the famous things would be this quite tall metal can of shredded pork, which was, you had to be very inventive to figure out how to do something with that, which usually entailed washing all of that fat out of the pork. You'd have a big block of cheese, peanut butter. They didn't call things natural back then, but it was peanut butter that you had to mix because the oil had separated out on the top. And then, of course, one of the other items were powdered milk. So there were these items. You could either take or leave them, but at one time, if you didn't take them, you couldn't get them the next month. So if you didn't take that can of pork this month, you couldn't get it for the next month. So that was kind of an odd system. So this fell out of favor, and what we're more familiar with now is something, it used to be called food stamps, and you'd actually get, I don't know if they were actually ever stamps, but you get a booklet with this fake money in it. It'd be $1, $5, $10, but you would get this little booklet of these scripts that you could pull out and use at the register. And they could only be applied to certain things. You couldn't buy alcohol and tobacco with them. I don't remember if you could buy candy with them, but generally you had to buy food. And so that part of food stamps still continues, but on a card, and I'm going to talk about that a little later. There's also still is a program. There's a program, I think it's called WIC, and it's for people who have small children in the house to kind of help ensure that you're eating nutritious things. And that's much more restrictive of what you could actually buy or not. They would have to be WIC approved foods that you could purchase. So then we enter into the more modern age of food banks and food stamps. So first, let's get this food stamp thing out of the way. People buy lottery tickets with food stamps. They buy cigarette and alcohol with food stamps. Well, no, they don't. Well, they're using that same card, but they're not using the food stamp portion. What happened was, at one point, and I think this goes by state government, because I don't think a lot of people in Maine have this huge value on their EBT card. It's now electric benefit card or something. The people issuing the state that were issuing welfare checks realized that producing a check is fairly costly. Actually having one printed out with a person's name on it and sending it to them. That there's a certain cost involved in that. And when you're doing a lot of them, that cost is high. So at one point they figured out, and they said, wait a second. These people have got this food stamp card anyway. So let's just take that money we were supposed to give, that we were giving them, and this was always money that could be spent at their own discretion. I mean, they could spend what they wanted to spend it on. And they just said, let's transfer that balance each month onto that card. And it'll just be easier for the government, and it will cost way less. So that's exactly what's happened. So say you got a family that meets some government poverty standards, and you're in a state that does that. They might have $300 on that card that is non-food stamp money, besides having food stamp money. So, but it isn't a case where you can actually use the food stamp portion to buy alcohol, tobacco, and you can't buy sneakers with it. You can't go to a bar with it, all these different things. But with that other cash value, you can do those things just like you always could, because there's no one monitoring what you spend a welfare benefit on. Okay? I had a very short period once where I got a certain low amount of food stamps when I was unemployed once with 6 kids. And back then it was these scripts, these little paper bills that you would use. And so now let's talk about the modern food bank. There's kind of 3 kinds, and sometimes they're a mixture of these 3 things. This is about who can go to a food bank, okay? Usually there's a residency requirement. So a particular food bank serves a town or sometimes a group of towns. So usually you can hear my parrot actually laughing in the background, my daughter's parrot. So this, you'd have a residency requirement. So like Gorham has a food bank, Westbrook has a food bank. If you live in Westbrook, you can't go to the Gorham one. If you live in Gorham, you can't go to the Westbrook one. And usually they're limited on how many times you can go to them too, usually. That's usually once a month or sometimes twice a month, depending on, like there's one food bank that I used to drive someone to, and 1 week was perishable items, and 2 weeks later you could come back and that would be when they would pass out the non-perishable items. So for some reason it was just easier for them to do it. And a lot of times food banks are where they can find volunteers, and so a lot of times that's churches and things like that kind of host this food bank. So you have a residency requirement. Then a lot of them actually have, as you would expect, an income guideline. Sometimes this is what's considered the poverty line, or sometimes it's 150% above the poverty income for that family size. So in other words, it's different if it's a man and a wife than if it's a man and a wife with 3 kids. The numbers are different. So in these food banks, you'd have to be able to prove residency and prove your income. Then the final food bank is no requirements at all. Sometimes they still have residency requirements, but there's no income requirements. They don't check your income or anything. You just show up there and get something. And they, I guess, trust that you're doing it and you need it. And why some of these requirements evolved and why some of them have gone for different food banks is, if you take federal money for your food bank, they micromanage it quite a bit. In other words, a lot of times you're not free to do what you want as a food bank because of these federal guidelines that you have to abide by if you take this money. So a lot of food banks just finally said, no, federal government, we are not going to we don't want to take your money. We want to be able to run our food bank the way we want to run it. And they get funding other ways. Now what happens too with a lot of food banks is they get short-dated or excess food from different places like bakeries, grocery stores, and things like that. We've actually got a large organization called the Good Shepherd Food Bank that serves, I don't know if it's just southern Maine or not, but they're like almost like I don't want to call them a warehousing thing, but they organize a lot of this thing about people have food and getting to people who need the food. So sometimes food banks will go to this place and get the things they want. I've noticed before too, some food banks are run by churches, like I said, because there are volunteers tend to be volunteers there, and I'm sure there are ones that aren't too, but there are ones that are just held in halls and different things, and people not of church groups run, do it and volunteer. I'm not making this sound like it's only something that happens in churches. I'm just saying it often does, because they have the space, they have the people, whatever. But that's basically how it goes. You have, getting back to this federal income thing, some food banks get donations from people that are actually cash donations, and a lot of times they'll get donations in, like I was saying, food that's sometimes short dated, sometimes not, and they'll actually go out and purchase things. Like, I've been at a dollar store before, and there was someone behind me, and they had like 30 of these jellies, these squeezed strawberry jellies. And I said, gee, you must like strawberry jelly a lot. And she says, no, I'm buying it for the food bank. Well, see, that would be an item they would put in an offer with the things for people that went to the food bank. And so that's basically kind of it, is the idea that society recognizing that there are people kind of on the bottom of the rung that need help at certain times. And so that's the way it's offered in this food bank type system. And each food bank will be quite different, what they have, what they don't have, some of the rules, guidelines they have, what they offer. So it's just and usually, like I say, there's usually a requirement of time that you've gone to one, you can't go to one for another period. Although I know there's one in our area that is open in the one evening a week, and you can go there every week. And they have very loose requirements. This again is done by a church, and they have very loose requirements about, you kind of have to be in the within the certain area, at least, of a certain number of towns that they serve. But I thought it was important to clear up what food banks, or inform people what food banks are, in case you do need one, in case you fall under those guidelines where you feel like you're not meeting your bills and you need some help with food. But also this myth of the idea that people are using food stamps to buy non-food items. They really aren't. They're using just a balance that's been transferred on that card that they normally would have gotten as a check, that they could cash and just use for whatever they want to. You would hope that they would use it wisely, but it's up to them. One reason I brought this up was there was a post that recently that someone was thinking of going back to the old system, where you would go and you basically get a box of food each month, rather than having the food stamp system. And so it's just interesting to hear someone thinking about going way back to that older system, because it seems invariably when our pocketbooks are tight, or the economy's not doing well, that we look at people that are getting certain services, and we want to make sure they're doing the right thing with their money. In other words, we've decided they shouldn't be eating too much candy, they shouldn't be buying alcohol, they shouldn't be buying cigarettes and all of those things. And but then, as the economy's better and we're not so worried about taxes, we kind of don't care what they spend the money for. But the whole situation and controversy with the food stamp thing could be completely solved by making other requirements that the rest of the money can be spent on. It'd be very easy for a state government to say, oh yes, now you can't buy any alcohol with this, you can't buy this with it, you can't buy that with that. But they haven't chosen to do that. But that would be a way to solve this problem People think that people on food stamps are going out and buying lottery tickets and alcohol. Well, they could just mark those off as things that can't be purchased, and that would be the end of the controversy. But that isn't what the people that are in charge of the money want to do. That might be what the public thinks should happen. But so there you go. A little bit of history of food banks, history of this whole idea of food stamps and how it's kind of changed, and how the distributing welfare money's changed, how it's gone on this card instead. Like I know someone that has, this is in Maine, they're disabled, and so they get a certain amount on their card, they're a single person, and they get $10 cash on that card too. So there's $10 only that they can spend on other things. Out of, I think they were telling me they get $130 in food stamps, but then there would be this $10 extra, and that was originally put on there for money for transportation, for the bus lines, for this person to get to the doctor when they needed to and stuff. So that's what that is. That's what that kind of was earmarked for. But I suppose if the person decided to walk, if you're in a city environment, you decide to walk to your doctor's appointment instead of spend that money on the bus, you can use it for anything. But I don't think my state, Maine, is that big on putting large balances on those cards. I could be wrong, but I haven't been able to survey people or something. I mean, I don't have a card or anything like that. I just go to a food bank once a month. So there it is. Bye.